Hello, everyone, and welcome to another edition of Connecting with Kim here on Tampa Bay Arts and Education Network. You can also catch the audio of our show on Sun Radio 96.3 FM and on your favorite streaming platform. We're so glad you joined us today because we have a great show coming up. And before we begin, I want to give a shout out to my sponsor, the Spring of Tampa Bay, who provides my on-air wardrobe from the Spring Boutique located at the corner of Swann and Henderson. Please go and visit them because the net proceeds from the boutique as well as the thrift store go to support their mission, which is providing sanctuary and services to survivors of domestic violence and their children. And they do a great job of it. They've been doing it for a long time, and I want you to help support their mission. And besides, you find all these really great things when you go shopping there. Please check out my Facebook and Instagram pages, Connecting with Kim, so you can see the photos of what I got from the boutique and what's available and when it will be available. Okay? So thank you. So I'm so excited because we have a great show and we have a first timer on Connecting with Kim, which is something we really love when we have new folks on the show. And so I'm going to introduce him to you now. His name is Dr. Gino Collura, and he's an author and a behavioral scientist. Welcome, Gino, to Connecting with Kim.
Oh, Kim, I've been looking forward to this conversation for a long time. So excited to be here.
Oh, I'm so happy to hear that because, you know, we met through mutual friends.
Yes.
We'll give a shout out to Danny Alvarez.
Big shout out.
Yeah, big shout out. Because we met through him because we were fortunate enough to be invited to do a commercial.
Correct, yes.
Sort of a campaign ad.
Yes.
For Danny when he was running for rep, and he won.
Yes, he
and
did.
we had such a great time that day. Mm-hmm. And then we, followed each other and we're friends on Facebook, and you know, you have an adorable family.
Thank you so
And I
much.
want to congratulate you on you're expecting another child.
Yes, we are.
So that is so wonderful. I'm so happy for you both.
We are thrilled.
So anyway, as I start out the show, I always allow my guests to take a few moments at the top of the show, take as long as you want, to talk about their life journey this far and what is bringing us to have this discussion here today. And that's kind of where we'll launch.
Yeah, I love that. So, gosh, where to start, right? So I am what they call a Tampeño through and through, right? So I was born and raised in Tampa, third generation, right? Kind of a quintessential Tampa family in the sense that my mother's of Cuban heritage and my father's of Sicilian heritage, right? So cigar rolling, the whole thing, right, has very much been a staple in our family. So born and raised here in the Bay Area, went to USF for my bachelor's, my master's, my doctorate degree as well. And I've had a really unique journey in the sense of relationships. I've had a very unique journey in the sense of life's adversities as well. And what do I mean by that, right? So at the age of about 8 years old, I was driving home from school. I was not driving. My aunt was driving, right? We were carpooling at the time, and I had my two baby cousins in the vehicle with me. And we're about 200 yards away from my house. And in the midst of her driving, there was a huge bang, a really loud noise, and her head kind of flew back. Ooh. And when her head flew back, of course, 8 years old, I'm a kid, I don't know what's going on.
Yeah, you don't know what's going on.
And I see her put her hand over her face, and there's just a sea of red, right? So you can only imagine. So,
you've been freaked out.
100%, right? So long and short, what ended up happening is that she was shot. And
She was shot?
She was shot.
Oh, my God.
And so there was a child who got a hold of his father's rifle and thought it would be a sound thing to take shots at cars that were driving down the road. Now, mind you, this is north, like Pasco County. Like, you would not think something like this would happen. Lots of acreage, lots of open space.
Yeah.
So I say all that to say, as you can imagine, I began at a very young age, cultivating a deeper sense and understanding of life, right? And kind of like how precious this thing, life, is, and how important relationships with those that we love the most really, truly are, right?
Did she survive? I mean, I got to ask.
Yeah, she did. And
Okay,
she's still
good.
with us to this day.
Okay, great.
Yes, yes.
Because, I mean, I would start crying in a few seconds.
No, it was obviously an incredibly traumatic thing.
Absolutely.
But more for her than, I mean, obviously myself and my two cousins.
Right.
But she's an incredibly strong and resilient woman. So she's doing great. She's doing wonderful, and we're very blessed for that. But that kind of planted some seeds at a young age, and that have stuck with me for a very long time. And that began my interest and fascination with human behavior. Why do people do what they do, right? Both from an action and a reaction perspective. And that really kind of created a pathway for me to start studying and understanding stress and trauma, and how trauma and stress are related. And there's such a thing as micro stress and micro trauma, and macro stress and macro trauma. But when you take a look at the way in which we operate nowadays in relationships with cell phones and social media and the tempo that we keep that is just so incredibly fast that we're not necessarily biologically equipped for or designed for. It's a constant catch up, and it's a constant to-do list. There's a lot of challenges that can bring, right? And so I wanted to understand the neuroscience behind it. I wanted to understand the cultural implications behind that. And that's really what put me on the path to becoming a behavioral scientist, right? And so I always say behavioral scientist because the actual discipline itself is a mouthful, but I'll break it down for everybody. It's called neuroanthropology. So it's neuroscience mixed with medical and cultural anthropology. So I spent a long time studying day in, day out with folks in the military and the special operations community.
Yeah, I know, because you do a lot with the military.
Yes, I do.
I mean, we're Facebook friends, so I see all your posts and
Yes.
your Instagram and whatnot. So, I mean, I know. And that's why, you know, I wanted to have you on the show because after I saw all those posts and things, I thought, I really want to know what he does. And when you sent me the subject matter, which is, I'm gonna read this so I don't miss one single word, maintaining meaningful relationships in a time of connected disconnection. And we're going to talk about that at length, but that resonated with me because we are more connected than we've ever been, and we are more disconnected than we've ever been.
That's exactly right. And it is becoming more and more prevalent. I mean, you just take a look at some of the mental health challenges, right, that we are dealing with, especially in a post-COVID world. The whole idea of isolation, right, but at the same time, I can click FaceTime and talk to anybody in the world whenever I want to, right, or hop on the computer and I can chat via Facebook, Instagram, take your pick. So it's a very unique thing because, look, at the end of the day, as human beings, this is such an important thing. We are human beings, not human machines.
Right.
Right? And so there's something to be said about the being part, right?
We're social animals.
We are, right? And we have to be present with one another, right? And so many folks, it's, you know, if I go out to dinner with my wife, yes, I'm out to dinner with my wife, but is it myself, my wife, and my phone, and her phone, right? Or is it the two of us conversing and actually having meaningful discussion instead of just going through the motions, right?
So answer the question, are you putting the phones aside when you go out?
Always.
On date night?
Always, absolutely.
I know you have date nights.
Yes, every week, without fail, without fail. It's been a staple for she and I.
I think it's important.
It
I
is
love that you're doing that.
Incredibly important.
But
incredibly
especially
important.
putting aside the phones.
Have to. Yes, have to. I mean, and look, she is a working professional, as am I. I mean, there's always something, right? Always something. It's just a question of, do you have the discipline, right, to kind of churn that away and say, you know what, right now the priority is me and you and nothing else.
That's right.
Right, and that is so profound that, unfortunately, a lot of folks nowadays, just from a priority perspective, it's not a priority. They say it is, right, but the actions kind of paint a different picture.
Well, you and I'm sure you have experienced this when you go out on date night or anywhere. You go in the restaurant, and there is everybody like this.
Yeah.
They're sitting around a table or in a booth or whatever, but everyone is like this.
Yes.
They're all on their phones. They're not even looking at each other.
No, they're not.
I mean, I find it very disconcerting and upsetting.
And I mean, and look, and that's when you're out in public. How about driving?
Yeah.
Right? Not to even mention that, right? Or walking. Like, you can walk through downtown right now, and I guarantee you'll see a handful at any given time of folks who are doing that, right?
And taking off through the intersection,
That's
not even paying attention.
exactly right. That's exactly right.
Yeah.
So, you know, when you take a look at those sorts of things and to understand that, look, at the end of the day, the brain is not, we're not wired to multitask. We are wired to do one thing and one thing well at a time, right? We can cultivate an attribute of multitasking, but it doesn't necessarily mean it's what's best for us, right? From a mental health and emotional regulation perspective. So, I spent a good chunk of time working with folks in the military to understand, especially when you're dealing with those levels of trauma, right? And that kind of dislocation, where you're gone for 12 to 15 months at a time, you're separated from your family, and you're dealing with life or death every single day, right? And so it really presented a few different aspects of what is important in relationships. And one of the most profound things that came out of it, Kim, is the most important relationship you have is a relationship that exists with yourself, right? And I say that, and folks kind of look at me like, I know me, like I know, right? And so I cannot tell you how many times, Kim, I have done workshops and seminars, and I will start the workshop or seminar, and I will say, take out a blank sheet of paper, and I want you to write your own personal constitution. Tell me what you stand for. Tell me what you symbolize and represent, as if I've never, ever met you, ever in my life, and just spell it out for me. And it's amazing, Kim.
You get a lot of blank stares?
Oh, my goodness.
Yeah, people are looking down.
That's exactly right.
You know, it all begins with, and you and I know this from because I think we both have faith in our life, if you don't love yourself first, you will not be able to love anyone else.
That's exactly
you
right.
have to love yourself first.
That's exactly right.
And that's not always easy. I'm not
No.
saying, but you have to love yourself first.
Yes, you do. You do. And in order to love yourself, you have to know yourself.
Exactly.
Right? And so what does it take to know yourself? And that's where it gets kind of interesting, because so many individuals have a very hard time with confronting who they actually truly authentically are. I could ask someone, so write out your job description for me. Or write out what it means to have good friends in your life. But when I ask you who you are and what it is that you stand for and what it is that you want your life, your legacy to be, right, at a deep emotional, psychological level, we start piercing some layers there, right? And it's amazing, the majority of folks nowadays have no clue. They don't have a clue.
So is this a seminar you're teaching, you're conducting over a period of time? So help me understand that.
Yeah, absolutely. So essentially what I'll do is, so I have a book called The 7 Layers of Successful Relationships, right?
Okay.
So I do a lot of speeches and workshops based off of that particular book, right? And there's a workbook that goes along and a bunch of activities that we'll do with different groups, including the military. But more often than not, it's either having to do with relationship management, identity management, right, which is equally as important when we start talking about the relationship we have with ourselves, and resiliency, right? And so what it means to be, have faith and be quote unquote tough, right, in the face of adversity. How do you push through that adversity and be able to do it to the highest and best capacity as a human being, right? And it's a very tough thing, because a lot of folks, when they hear the term resiliency, there's so many definitions, just like leadership, there's so many definitions that are out there, right? But when you really break it down to what it means, it's your ability to prevail. Can you prevail in an optimistic fashion and look at the glass half full instead of half empty? Right? And there's a lot that goes into it as far as intestinal fortitude and what's going on within, right? So I do a lot of workshops on that as well. And then, a big thing that exists there too is relationship management, right? Especially with husbands and wives. It's an amazing thing, Kim, when you take a look at some of the trends, especially post-COVID, of what has gone on with marriages.
Oh, yeah.
Right? I mean, some of the challenges that have presented themselves that you never would think.
Well, so you took these, so it's a situation where all of a sudden you were living your professional lives, and then you were coming home and spending whatever time that was.
Yeah.
And now all of a sudden, no, you are spending all that time together. And I think, I say this, but I think there are people that discovered, I'm not sure I like you, and I'm not sure I want to spend all this time with you.
100%.
I think all these things that you just, in your daily life, you keep tamped down, or you just deal with it or whatever, all of a sudden they come to the forefront because now you're there 24/7.
That's exactly right.
And you're like, ugh.
We occupy our lives with so many distractions, right? Because again, we know that things have to be addressed, but we choose not to address them because it don't feel good, right? There's an uncomfortability that comes along with it, and we don't want to face that. And that lends itself to, let's talk about resiliency and pushing through those things, because it matters, right? And if you keep ignoring it, what happens? It'll fester and fester and until one day, it's exactly right. And what we saw with COVID is all of that got accelerated very fast, right?
Big time.
And people did not have the communication skills. They didn't have the emotional capacity. I mean, it was a very stressful time for anybody and everybody, right? So, when from a relationship perspective, and me being a behavioral scientist, looking at that and saying, wow, that is fascinating, in the sense of it's a further validation of just how far gone we are, right, as human beings, and understanding the importance of genuine and authentic connection with one another, right? But I go back to the common denominator. It all boils down to the quality and depth of relationship that you have with yourself.
So when you conduct these seminars and you ask people to write that on the piece of paper, is everybody able to do it, or do they struggle with it over a couple of hours or a couple of days, or do they have? I'm sure you've witnessed some breakthroughs with people where
Big time.
all of a sudden because I'm a big believer in putting pen to paper.
Yes.
I have some friends that do a 5-year plan together, their whole married life, right?
Yeah.
And they put it on paper.
Yes.
Because there's something about writing it down and looking at it. It makes it more real.
Without a doubt. Without a doubt. So it's interesting. I would say, Kim, 95% of folks I have done that activity with over the past 6 years, 95, maybe even 99, they don't know what to put. Right?
Really?
It'll be maybe at best some bullet points, right? A paragraph or two. But when you think about a constitution, I mean, it's a robust document,
Right.
right? I mean,
Right.
there's so many moving parts to you as a person,
Right.
right? And to be able to know that, acknowledge and put it on paper is so incredibly important. So to answer your question, very, very few have actually put down something of true substance, right? And that lends itself to having, obviously, a much deeper discussion about priorities, right? Because here's a really interesting thing about that, Kim, is if I were to go to anyone who is a professional and ask them, tell me about your job, right? Tell me about what you do, who
They
you
can
work
tell you
with.
chapter and verse.
It just comes right out,
no
right?
hesitation.
What are the SOP, all that
Yeah.
stuff, right? But then we start getting a little bit deeper, right? And then I'll say, okay, so what does it mean? So you're married, okay, so what does it mean to be a good spouse? Paint that picture for me. And 9 times out of 10, there's pretty generic responses. So let's go one step further, right? So how did you come to those values, right? Where do those values come from? Because value alignment between two people is everything, right? But if you don't understand truly, not just what your values are, but what are you doing every single day to live those values? Because there's often a very big difference, right? When I tell you, what I value in life, honesty, integrity, and hard work, and wonderful, right? But if you have a track
Those
record,
are just words. They're not actions.
thank you. That's exactly right. All right.
Yeah.
And so how do we start to peel the layers back to get to actionable items that are actually going to move the needle and making you a better person so you can be a better partner and have a better relationship with folks? And that's a huge thing.
If you're just joining me now on Connecting with Kim, my guest in the chair is Dr. Gino Collura, and he's an author and a behavioral scientist. And we were talking about, and I want to go back to this because it resonates with me, maintaining meaningful relationships in a time of connected disconnection. And because we are. I think those are just words. How do you put it into action?
That's exactly right.
And I think that we are such a disposable society,
Yes.
right? Everything in our life is disposable. If you don't like that, throw it away. If you don't want to do that anymore, go get it. It's just, everything is just, if you don't like it, get rid of it.
Right.
Right? And that is not going to work if you want to have a long-term relationship with somebody.
No, it
you
is not.
can't have that kind of attitude.
That's exactly right.
When I got married, my parents gave me 2 pieces of advice. My dad said, don't get into money problems because money splits the best of families. And my mother said, don't go to bed mad because you'll only wake up the same way and maybe worse, right? And that's everybody goes through tough times, and they'd always say, it's the tough times. Going through the tough times is what's you got to be friends with the person you marry. I really believe that.
No, that
if you're
is so
not, if
true.
you're not friends with them, you're not going to make it.
That's exactly right. I mean, here's the thing, right? Especially when you start talking about the initial attraction and being infatuated with somebody, right? It's all hot and heavy, and it's I can't stop thinking about them. And look, from a neuroscience side of the house, right? There's a very real thing.
Endorphins are flowing.
Oh my gosh, you got dopamine, serotonin, oxytocin, all these things that are going on. And then you start kind of working through that honeymoon phase. You're like, well, wait a minute, right? So imagine, though, if we could equip younger folks, right? Especially when they don't know what they don't know, right? And by the way, there's also plenty of well-seasoned adults that don't know what they don't know, right? I mean, that's a very real thing.
Yeah.
But to just stop and be reflective and say, you know what? Let me put myself objectively into this situation and understand how is it we align or we don't. But how many 21-year-olds are out there able to do that or have the tools or the education to do something like that? It requires a level of depth, right, and a level of understanding of oneself within that takes time to develop, right? So, when you look at those moments of infatuation and what is going on, and then you take a look at what happens over time. So, for example, let's say newlywed couple, they get married, everything's wonderful, everything is great. Well, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 years go by, and all that the fire, right, the robust flame starts to die down a little bit because life kind of kicks in, responsibilities, right, kicks in. And so now that huge flame kind of turns down to just some embers and hot coals, right? Well, that's a huge warning sign, right? It doesn't mean it's always going to be how it was in the very beginning.
Right.
But we start talking about things like intimacy, right? Intimacy theoretically should get better in time, right? Because the more time that goes by, the more I better understand my partner and they understand me.
Right.
And look, and I'm not talking about the physical side of intimacy, right? As far as that whole thing. I'm talking more about what you're saying, how you're interacting, a hug when it's needed, a massage when it's needed, all these different components that when you start kind of blowing on those coals and those embers and you do little things like that, it's what I call T-squared, talk and touch. When you really get talk and touch down, right, and it's dialed in with your partner, oh my gosh, that flame can be more robust than ever, right, because of the foundation that it was built off of. Not just that initial pop, right? But here's the crazy thing. The same kind of exists without the intimacy factor with business relationships and relationships in general. What are you doing to nurture that relationship? And nurture means you got to go deep with the person that you're having that two-way piece of communication with. And I always break this down to folks. When you start breaking down communication, what does it mean, right?
It sounds so trite, but you know, it really, most problems originate with lack of communication.
Big time, right? And people forget why it is.
And this doesn't help because texting.
Oh my gosh, no.
Texting is not communication.
Not at all, not at all, right? And you know, so we communicate as a means of communing. Well, what's communing? Sharing, right? We commune to do what? Build community. Right? And so that doesn't mean I'm talking about like, you know, your neighborhood community. I mean the community in your home, in your life, right? The people that are there. So that tool of communication is meant to build, right? Not destruct or not just be, this is what I want to say, period. No, it's what am I saying and how is it going to be received? And then how are we going to have a back and forth that's going to be constructive for the both of us? And that's a skill set.
Well, and on top of that, communication isn't just about the words you and I say to each other. Communication is about my facial expression,
absolutely,
my body language, how I used my hands, what I did with my eyes. You know, all of that is going on while you and I are communicating.
That's exactly
and you're
right.
taking signals from that, and I'm sending signals from
exactly.
that. You or any other person I'm talking to. So a lot of nonverbal communication to me is just as important.
Without a doubt. And you know, when you take a look, and there's so much science behind this, right, as far as the physical cues and body language, and you know, you could sit there all day and make up a bunch of mumbo jumbo, right? But 9 times out of 10, the body doesn't lie, right? And so when you can read what is going on with someone's posture and body language, that's a very important skill set. But again, we're human beings, not human machines, which means we always have a little bit of bias, right? Because look, we have an emotional investment in our interpretation of what's going on. So that is and it's a very hard thing to really achieve a level of true objectivity in a relationship because we're vested in it, right? When you're vested in something, goodness gracious, like it gets kind of choppy, right? As far as the waters are concerned, to be able to understand how do I actually put myself in Kim's shoes? I want to understand Kim's perspective of how she views the world to a T, right? It takes time.
And I'm not sure that's ever really fully achievable.
It's not.
Because we all have, I remember when I was in school, we, you know, studied Shakespeare, right?
Yeah.
Well, let me tell you the most important lesson I learned from Shakespeare, and I've never forgotten it. Shakespeare said, "To thine own self be true." And I took that to heart. I have practiced that my whole life.
Yeah.
You can project whatever it is you want, image to the outside world and to other people and so on and so on. But there's that part of you that's deep inside that no one else knows about, that's secret, and but you better not lie to yourself about what that is.
That's exactly right.
Because that's how you're going to get sick.
And that's it right there. So now you start talking about the manifestation of illness, right? And look, that's a very real thing, right? So in the scientific world, we have this concept that's called allostasis, right? And what is allostasis? Allostasis basically means the amount of stress that you carry at any given time, right? That equates to what's called allostatic load. Okay. Well, if you look at allostatic load measurements over the past 20 years, right, it has gone
through the roof.
Oh my goodness gracious. But again, connected disconnection. We're more connected now more than ever, which means that we could have greater social capital, we could have better access to people that we need to talk to, yet our stress levels are through the roof, right? So what is going on, right? Where's the disconnection happening? And it's all about the quality and depth of the relationships that we have. Is it just a commodity, right? Do I have friends that are just commodities that I just reach out to when I need something and that's it? Or is it actually a beneficial relationship that's building me as a person? Because there's a big difference.
Absolutely.
Big, big difference, right?
Well, we only have about we have about 3 minutes left. So I want to make sure that we cover. You're also an author, so you mentioned your book before, but I think we ought to come back to it. And I want you to take a few minutes to share with our watching and listening audience any direct message you want to give to them.
Absolutely.
I always give everybody that opportunity. So, but you know, everything you said just resonates with me so much because, and how often are you doing this every day?
No, not every day. There's a few different areas that I dedicate my time to as well in the healthcare space.
Okay.
But this sort of topic and content, probably I'd say 50-40% of the time I'm doing things like this. And the work that I do with the military obviously is very impactful for me because it holds a very near and dear place to my heart.
Right.
So I try to do a lot of work with them, and they've given me the opportunity to do so.
Is that over at MacDill, or is it?
So I've done it at MacDill, and I've also done it up at Fort Bragg in North Carolina.
Okay, great. Yeah,
Yes,
I thought I saw. So take a few minutes if you want. If there's anything else you want to share with our audience about your book or what you do, or reach out to, how they could reach out to you if they want to.
Absolutely. So the best way to reach out to me is if you go to my book's website, which is www.7enlayers.com. So it's 7 layers, but instead of the V, it's a number 7. And one of the biggest things that I would tell folks who are tuning in right now is, look, at the end of the day, the capacity and potential for change in your life, change for the better, right, is there. You just have to make the choice right here, right now, to start pushing yourself into a direction that's going to allow you to be more disciplined, to have deeper relationships with others by having a deeper relationship with yourself.
I love that. Well, I really appreciate you taking the time out of your schedule to be with us today on Connecting with Kim. It was really, I just was so curious about, what is it that you're doing, and it's resonating with me because I believe all these things that I took to turning my phone off. I put my phone on sleep at 10 o'clock at night, and I don't allow it to wake up until 6:30 in the morning. Because if I didn't, that phone would ding all night.
Without a doubt.
There would be something going on the phone. And I made my list of people that can get through, obviously, if there's some kind of problem. But I took that to have a break from it all.
Yes, yeah,
because it's constant, and I have an elderly mother, so this phone is always with me.
Yeah,
I'm never without it. No matter, it's here beside me.
Absolutely.
While we're filming, because I got to be connected in case something happens.
Without a doubt, that's exactly right. Absolutely.
But thank you so much.
Oh, Kim, it's such a pleasure.
So that's all we have time for today on Connecting with Kim. I know it was a wonderful episode, so maybe Gino will come back in the future and share even more with us, because this is a huge subject. And getting in touch with yourself and being authentic with yourself is fundamental. I mean, it's fundamental to every other relationship you're going to have in life. So I want to thank him for being here. I want to, again, thank my sponsor, the Spring of Tampa Bay, for providing my on-air wardrobe. And I want to thank you for tuning in, as you do every week. We try to bring you the best information, the best folks, so that you can live your best life in our corner of paradise. And it really is our corner of paradise. So thank you. Come back next week. We'll see you.